Hello. This is a special Genrenauts development diary. I haven't done one of these in a while. And part of that is because from March until the start of this month, I was not doing a lot with Genrenauts because it was on submission. I decided that instead of doing, or instead of trying to set myself up to do a lot of learning how to do layout when I was already struggling to get work done on my novels, that it would make sense to just let the Genrenauts game document sit for a little bit and then polish it and send it out to my kind of number one, fingers crossed, pie in the sky publisher option. And this was in like discussion and consultation with my agent. She does not have like she's working with me on the game, even though games isn't her specialty. So it's really good to have someone to bounce things off of, and to have a person in my corner who is experienced in like contract negotiations. So if and when we do get a publisher, ideally when a good publisher, then I'll be able to tap her in to help with talking about the contract and things, especially because this is in an IP or a setting that I've already done stuff with, and I don't want to necessarily like license out all of the rights for that whole universe just for the game, because I also want to do more stuff with the fiction. And we have somebody who is representing the media rights for Genrenauts for like TV or film, and so it's important to be able to coordinate all of that. And my agent is the person who's really in a position to be able to do that. So there's an update because just this week I ran a playtest demo session of Genrenauts for the submission team at said publisher. And this was interesting and strange because it was basically, what if running an RPG for some people was a job interview? And it's not really that, because it's not that they're hiring me for the job of game designer if they want to buy the book, so much as they decide that they like this project and want to work with me, right? It's more about the project than it is about me. But that activity in the event felt very much in some ways like a job interview, right? The thing that's being interviewed or evaluated is really more the game than me, but they asked me to GM the game, and so I'm doing everything that I can to highlight the elements that are cool and what makes it special and distinct, and kind of the types of fun that people can hope to have playing the game, and encouraging and facilitating that type of fun. And I think it went really well. I am very glad to have had a lot of deliberate practice GMing in the last couple of years, between running Forge in the Dark games for Speculate in Splendor and Shadow, and now Valorword, and running games on Start Playing with my Blades group and other things like that, where I'm just really in practice with this style of RPG. And I prepped more for this playtest session than for any other playtest session that I've done, because I wanted to be able to adjust and pivot and move the play in any number of directions depending on what people were interested in, right? Did they want to spend more time with character creation? Did they want to spend more time on recon in a mission? Did they want to spend more time after the engagement roll? Did they want to try to roll through to being able to do downtime? Because I did not receive a lot of direction from this team of like, this is what we want you to do. It was much more, show us the game in the best light that you think that it has, and in the way that you think best highlights what is cool and worthwhile and special about this game, which I appreciate in terms of giving me a lot of latitude. But it also meant that while I have a sense of what is cool and special about the game, I also wanted to have the flexibility to zoom in on or kind of jump over any of the elements that that people in this team were responding to or kind of wanted to move around. And so I did that. I was nervous about it all day, the day that it was happening, because it was such a a weird experience. I already get kind of anxiousness before I GM in a lot of situations, even though I'm GMing more frequently now than I have in possibly ever. When I would run games in high school, it was usually like once every other week or one or maybe two times a month. And the sessions there would be longer than the sessions that I run now because I'm mostly playing games in the evening. And so the game starts between 7 or 8 p.m. Eastern and ends between 10, 11, 12 Eastern. But the normal anxiousness that I have about running a game, even when I've done a decent bit of prep, but know that especially Forge in the Dark type games are very improvisational and collaborative, and so they can go in a lot of different ways. And then adding and this could will impact whether this company is going to make an offer of publication on this game. And so I did everything that I could to like help myself not stress out about it. I think it went well. There's some things that are in the game as written that I think work and make sense when you have a sense of the whole game, but I could understand being a little off-putting when they're taken in isolated context. So one place where I thought that I noticed one of the people that I was demoing for raise an eyebrow a little bit is when I was describing things that, okay, here's what characters have. Characters, you write the name, you write pronouns, you pick their playbook. And then for like background stuff, you have, instead of heritage and background, it's culture and history. And the culture is like the person's cultural background. And this can be anything from, they're a survivor of a post-apocalyptic group in the world of post-apocalypse land, to, detailing their kind of cultural positionality from Earth. And the idea of putting the word culture on a short kind of text field and the intimation that you're asking someone to describe all of what's relevant about their cultural identity in one line, I can understand that being a little bit of an eyebrow raiser for people. And I'm not in any way, shape, or form married to the idea that it has to be framed that way, right? Because this could easily become background in history, more like the way that Beam Saber does, where background is kind of where this person comes from, what their family is like or what their, upbringing was like. And then history is what were they doing professionally or to scrape by in the world before they became a mecha pilot. And so for Genrenauts, I could have background in history, where history is more like vocational and background is more family, culture, upbringing, that kind of thing. And I think it would be able to cover most of the same things. And so if this publisher or some other publisher that I work with says, we don't necessarily think that framing works really well, let's talk about something else, I'm happy to do that. I think it's not especially load bearing, and I can understand why people might be a little off put by that. And so that's okay. I think that even with that response, and this is of course something that I read and may not have been the actual response, because I can read body language and I think it's one thing and it's actually something else. And I didn't ask about it directly because it didn't seem appropriate at the time. But at the end of the playtest, kind of when the fiction stuff was done and we were kind of debriefing and talking about the game, the discussion got to a place where I was able to talk a little bit more about where the game comes from and my philosophy on what I want the game to be able to do. I think that put into context the choice to have that kind of fill in the box section for culture, because I talk about the ways that marginalized people along any number of axes will learn the majority scripts and will learn the story structures of kind of the cultural majority in order to be able to fit in order to be able to find a place for themselves in this culture or in this society, even when the cultural scripts don't explicitly make room for them. The way that people learn to code switch, where they have the way that they behave with the people who share their identities, and the way that they might behave when they are kind of surrounded by people with the majority identity, if they are marginalized in that along that same axis. So that is race, gender, sexuality, disability, nationality, any number of these ways that in-groups and out-groups are framed, and the way that stories and genre are executed and implemented to either reify, define, or attempt to break down those barriers between in-group and out-group. So like getting to talk from my folklorist and cultural studies and author background, I think helped put what I was doing with other stuff in the game into context and convey what's really going on, and perhaps allay any fears that people might have or may not have. I just may have been reading into it because I was nervous. Worry about the game being like, describe your entire culture anthropologically in the room for 5 sentences. You must reduce yourself. Like, that's not what I'm going for, but I can understand that worry. And again, like I said, if I end up crossing out culture in that category and replacing it with background, but the write-up covers some of the same elements, that's totally fine. It probably ends up doing most of what I want it to do, which is that those two fields are really they're RP prompts. They are a place to write down a little bit of information about who this person is and kind of what frames their experiences and the way that they would approach and think about stories in different genres. Because if you're someone who grew up in a country that had a long period of being colonized, whether that's by England or the U.S. or France or Spain or anything, you might have a different cultural relationship to something like space opera, which is a genre that has a long history of peddling in or discussing colonialism and imperialism. And so that's really what I was trying to get at, of like, put something in here about cultural context that will then be useful for you for role-playing, not you must define yourself to justify your existence, right? And so that, I think, all ended up working just fine. In that same discussion, one of the people asked if the book was going to basically provide a meta plot, or that whether there was going to be a meta plot. And there is a meta plot in the novella series. So I already had the ideas for a couple of campaign frames. And so the next thing that I'm going to do when it makes sense to do some more writing, whether that is with a publisher to kind of continue developing the book, or if this number one choice publisher turns the book down, deciding whether I want to put in some more material, fill out some things that maybe weren't as fully fleshed out, especially if I get feedback with a rejection that says, we felt like this section was underdeveloped, or we wanted more explanation of that thing here. If that ends up being the kind of response that I get, I might want to add some stuff or do some additional polish before then working with my agent to, send the book out more widely. Because there are not a ton of RPG publishers that like explicitly work on Forged in the Dark tabletop role-playing games, but Darrington Press starting to publish Illuminated Worlds, I think, creates an opening, not just theoretically to like send a game to Darrington Press and say, hey, you're publishing Illuminated Worlds games, and those are really a lot like Forged in the Dark games, so here's a Forged in the Dark game. But the fact that a publisher with the reach of Darrington, and their reach is because they are connected to Critical Role, in my opinion. It's a great business idea, right? You have a the most famous actual play group, and you like role-playing games. You start to design role-playing games that you can then feature on your number one world famous actual play group. Like, it's a great idea. Vertical integration. Business. Business. This is from the Lego movie. which is a very good film. Though I'm coming to hear in more recent times that Lord Miller, who I think directed that Lego movie and have done other Lego movies, maybe not the greatest people to work with for the people who were working on the Spider-Verse movies. So that's discouraging. But the people who made the animation did a good job. Anyway, so I'm going to work on some campaign frames, and that is basically 2 to 3 different options for the GM to take or to be inspired by or riff on for their campaign of Genrenauts. It's like, okay, you can run a campaign of Genrenauts where there is no meta plot. It's very episodic. It's case of the week. Maybe it's a little bit more of a office drama and your character relationships at the HQ. That's great. A campaign frame might be, okay, here are the rogue Genrenauts who are trying to rewrite the multiverse in a particular way so that our Earth Prime gets reverted or replaced by the version of Earth that they come from so they can finally go home. It's like Sliders, but make it Sliders more than Quantum Leap. Sliders, but make the people the Sliders the bad guys, right? And it's been a long time since I've seen Sliders, so I don't know whether that holds up, but it made a big impression on me when it was first on and I was watching it, and so there's a bit of it stuck in my head. I haven't gone back to it. So one campaign frame would be these rogue Genrenauts, and that would talk about here's where they come from, or here's some options of where they come from, here's what they're trying to do, the ways that they're trying to redirect or shape these genres to shift them in a particular way that will then kind of rewrite Earth Prime to being the world that they're used to so they can go home again. Or maybe there's a separate Prime world that's on the far end of some of these genre dimensions. And because people over here in our Earth Prime made changes that rippled through not just to the story worlds, but then back to this other Prime world. And now they can't get to that Prime world, and so they need things to change again so that the pathway is open, something like that. So that would be one campaign frame. And then another campaign frame might be like, aha, oh no, secretly the High Council, the people that founded the Genrenauts that you report to, are actually bad, and here's what you might do about that. Or a campaign frame that is something like, your characters have actually been stranded where they cannot go back to their Prime world because of the way that Ripple and Chaos has realigned and retconned some of these dimensions. And so then you are the ones who might have to try to push stories in particular ways to then reopen the dimension. And that campaign, you're not as well resourced, and so here's some alternate rules that you might take and things like that. And basically just provide a few options for GMs to either take and put behind their GM screen, so to speak, to be this meta plot that individual missions can kind of build toward or include elements of, or inspiration for a GM to go, okay, well, I don't want to do any of these, but this gives me an idea, so I'm going to take this and go somewhere else. I'm going to come up with a different idea for a meta plot, because I already have material in the GM section on how to end your game, right? You can kind of end a series of Genrenauts when the team has completed a special mission that they got to do as a result of filling the storyline clock in every region in their beat. And when they've succeeded at all those special missions across their regions, they have kind of addressed the relative maximum interdimensional chaos crisis. And so that's a good ending for a story, if not the whole story. So that could be the end of a season, or it could be the end of the whole campaign. Because Genrenauts is a Forged in the Dark game, it's been my experience running other Forged games that with characters accruing XP, there's a certain point at which it becomes incredibly hard to challenge them, because they're just able to throw so many dice and they have so many special abilities, and they can do just amazing group actions because everybody has become an all-around badass. Now I'm on about session 34 or 35 of a Blaze in the Dark game that I'm running through Start Playing Games, and we are close to an end of the campaign, but the players didn't want to be done yet. And so we've made a list of things that we're going to, like, oh, here's the stuff that still needs to be resolved, or things that we still want to do or get to, or character beats that we want to hit. And there's enough in there that we can go another few games. So we might get to 40 sessions of this campaign. And in the last session, I was still able to create challenge and suspense and drama for this group. I just had to push a little bit harder in terms of setting effect really low to begin with, because the group was going up against a faction that was 2 tiers higher than them. So they're a tier 2 gang, and they were going up against a tier 4 group. And if I continue to have them going up against those tier 4 or tier 5 groups, or exceptional individuals in tier 3 groups who kind of operate as if they were tier 4, then I might be able to keep up that challenge level. And then I can take that knowledge into my Genrenauts development and, reevaluate the math that I have of, here's how much ripple and how much rep they might get in a given mission, average plus or minus this many, multiply that by some stuff, and that tells me that a campaign could last roughly this many sessions, because it's this many missions times 2 if you're doing shorter sessions and your group likes to do long downtime. Because there are some groups that like to do short downtime, where they might do a mission for 2 hours and then downtime in a half an hour, and then do another mission in an hour and a half if they've got this longer play session, right? I like doing more with downtime because I find that it's a great place for role play and character relationships. And I think with Genrenauts, leaving space for downtime is really cool, because then you get to do more with the office drama part of the game, where you can have office rivals and office friends, and you can have relationships with other teams. And if you get tapped to go in and pinch hit for another team in a different genre that's not on your own team's beat, you have more context, where you already have a relationship with that team that maybe you're going to back up. Or that if your group gets benched and someone else has to pinch hit for you, you have more of an idea of what to expect, because you have relationships with people in that other team, and you get to do the kind of firehouse stuff and the downtime and the fun of, okay, well, we have martial arts training in the morning, and then lunch, and then in the afternoon somebody in a different team is going to give a colloquium on their interpretation of narrative scar tissue theory based on their recent case files and the interdimensional readings that the operations team in the Tokyo HQ have recently accumulated from the regions that are covered by that base. Right? There's a lot of depth that Genrenauts can go to, and not just because of the really high number of combinations of genres that your team can have. Because even if I ship the game with the number of regions that I have now, so that's 8 story regions, and a team is likely to have 3, 4, or 5 regions as their beat. I don't know the math off the top of my head of how many different combinations that is, but it's a lot of different opportunities and variety. And then especially if I have multiple campaign frames, and I have the guidance on a more episodic campaign, a more serial campaign, or the default that's serial episodic, where each mission is kind of its own thing, but the character relationships build and grow over time. There's the storyline clocks for each region and things like that. So I think that the game has a lot of promise. I've been getting very good feedback from the playtesters, cheerleading from my friends who are authors, who are kind of my first and primary playtest group. But a publisher is not going to publish just games that they like. It has to be games that they like, that they think that they can sell, that fit with their audience, or that are good for an audience that they want to try to develop. All these publishers have their own production pipelines and things like that. And so while I think that it will be easier to sell a Forged in the Dark game now that Candela Obscura is a thing, and Critical Role's, Darrington Press's, Illuminated Worlds games seem to be borrowing a lot and drawing a lot on the Forged in the Dark tradition, even if they're not officially labeled as Forged in the Dark games for whatever reason, I think that means that my chances of selling this game are actually going to be higher, because I could go to Darrington or other publishers and make the case that, hey, because you have, or because Darrington has these Illuminated Worlds games, more people are going to learn the mechanics that are the majority of the mechanics of a Forged in the Dark game. And so if you publish my game that is Forged in the Dark, you can say to people, if you're familiar with Illuminated Worlds games, this is like Illuminated Worlds, but XYZ. And I think that that's a perfectly solid pitch. I have the fact that there's a book series, that the series was a finalist for the R Fantasy Stabby Award for Best Serialized Fiction back when this collection came out. And the fact that I have this track record as an author, I already have an audience, I did this Kickstarter for the game. I think there are a lot of positive factors. The fact that I'm involved in an actual play group that is getting some critical acclaim and won that award from Rainbow Roll Rally. But none of that is a guarantee. And I'm trying to stay humble and keep my expectations in check and to not get impatient, to let the process take some time, to accept that it takes a long time to sell a game, just like it takes a long time to sell a novel. Sorry, my hair is a little bit wild today. And with this game on submission and having done that playtest, and then depending on what that feedback is, whether, if it's we're excited to move forward and we want to publish this, then of course I'm going to be spending a lot of time working on the game. If they don't make an offer, if I get a rejection from them, then that's talking with my agent, figuring out if I want to do some more revision to kind of like beef it up or maybe apply some of the feedback that I might have gotten from that first publisher with their rejection letter. And then handing it over to my agent to reach out to these publishers where, the ones that don't have open submission guidelines, she can make contact as my representative, even though like literary agents, to my knowledge, are not as common a thing in the RPG design world. The fact that I kind of am coming from the book space, I think that makes that more legible to a potential publisher. And then I'm being, able to draw on the fact that a lot of the skills that she has developed are skills in evaluating and pitching and selling publishers on creative works by her clients, which is, it's only so different from selling novels. It's notably different, but it's only so different. And it's less different than if I were asking her to be my agent as a musician, because it's still books. And the fiction world and the TTRPG world are substantially interconnected, right? There are a lot of people who are active in both spaces, and a lot of fictional properties become RPGs, and then RPGs inspire fictional properties in science fiction and fantasy prose. So that's all really good and encouraging, and I'm really glad to have done that playtest because I think it went well. And it is no longer in front of me as a thing to be really worried about because it was a new and different high-pressure thing that I had to do running a game, and then it was even higher pressure because it's running a game that I created. And while that means that I know it really well, it also means that there is an additional degree of like vulnerability that comes with it because I am asking people to spend their time and emotional energy on not just my kind of game master storytelling frame of or pitch of or version of a game, but that of a game that I also am the person who wrote. So I am glad that I mostly don't have a lot of stuff scheduled for this weekend, and I can take it as a weekend. I'm going to finish this video, I'm going to upload it to YouTube as a private thing, and then I'm going to post about it on Patreon for y'all. And that's most of what I have to do this weekend. Maybe we may get to do a speculate recording, but I don't think I'm going to be GMing that, so I don't have to do as much of it. So I'll get to hang out. I'll play some Zelda The Tears of the Kingdom, spend some time with Meg, maybe enjoy the weather if the weather moves a little bit toward being nicer, and stuff like that. So that is my Genrenauts development diary. If I have news for you in, a month or 2 months, that would be great. if that news is that this publisher or another publisher wants to pick up the game, I will of course need to talk with them about like, how much can I tell people in this Patreon group versus like, do they want to wait and have their people and their team control the announcement? So I will continue to share the information that I can when I can, and not really anything of note has changed in the game document yet. If and when I do write those campaign frames and I'm still like looking for a publisher and I don't have a publisher where they'll be like, hey, don't send this over or whatever, I'll keep on sharing stuff with y'all. And if and when I do get a publisher, I will try to talk with them and get some clarity on what things they're cool with me continuing to share with patrons here who are at this higher level, and at what point they want to say like, okay, we'd like you to stop here and ask people to follow development through our channels and something like that, because I don't know what the publishers are going to ask. I think to a certain extent, it's great to have this group of folks who are on Patreon, y'all who've been following the game's development for some time, because you already have that emotional investment in it. And when the game is picked up or when the game is published, I share that news with you, and any work that you want to do in telling friends or, recommending the game or playtesting the game and any of that kind of stuff, that becomes a bonus. And so I want to do everything that I can to keep y'all in the loop and to keep kind of sharing my appreciation with you all for the support that you have given me for my work overall and Genrenauts in particular over however long it is that you've been a patron. So thank you again for that support, especially in the last few years as things have been very difficult, but I'm really excited for the future for the Genrenauts RPG. I think that even if I go through all this whole submission list and nobody wants to publish the game, it will be a stronger game for having gone through that submission process. And when I then ideally self-publish it, it will be a better game, and y'all will be able to enjoy the extra effort that went into it through this submission process. So that's that. I don't know when there will be more news, but if I get the time to work on these campaign frames, I can maybe do a diary and check in about that with y'all. So that is that. If you mostly follow me here on Patreon, I would invite you to go and take a look at speculatesf.com, which is the home of the actual play group that I co-host with Gregory A. Wilson and Brandon O'Brien. Our series Valorword that I GM has been getting some very positive critical response from internet web festivals, the New Jersey Web Fest and the Minnesota Web Fest. And that is a campaign using the game Court of Blades, which is another Forged in the Dark RPG. So you can go and check that out. And any of the other podcasts that we do with different series that you can also find on speculatesf.com. And that is that. And now I'm going to stop and upload this video so y'all can watch it. Thanks. Bye.